So it's a lovely Saturday afternoon, so what better than to go for a drive, and why not bring you along and answer some questions. I had so many of you submitting some interesting and entertaining questions and asking stuff about my cars or about MX-5s in general, and I thought I'd do my best to entertain you with, I don't know, a bit of information, and perhaps we can just go along for a bit of a drive and have a bit of a chat. Without further ado, let's get straight into them. And the first one's from Alex P, and he goes, if budget is tight, what are the first priority mods that you would do on a mostly stock NB for chassis and traction? Without a doubt, number one is tires. They have such a critical impact on grip and performance. If you've just got a no-name brand or generic road tire and you swapped even just to a nice higher end grippier tire, you will see a significant change in the way the car handles, albeit there is a bit of a cost there. You did say budget is tight. Other than that, probably a set of cheapy coilovers, not max peding rods, maybe consider some aftermarket but used coilovers, a half decent brand please, just not max peding rods. Formula John says, what's the best alignment settings for track? The simple answer is go have a look at 9for9 Racing's website. They've got a link with all the different sort of setups that you would choose for the different types of driving you're doing. There's no point in me repeating what they've already done. Adam Sampson, looking to buy my first MX-5, don't want to spend a fortune, want something for the track and weekend driving. What should I look for? An NA or an NB, really. Their pricing is pretty similar nowadays between the two models. And performance and mods wise, that's all very similar. If you're looking for outright best bang for buck track car that's going to get you the best lap times, generally a VVT engine NB is a better starting point than any of the other NA or NB models out there, but it's much of a muchness for most people. Just grab whatever you think fits your budget and is available in your area. Nasser Al Gamdi wants to know more. That's why you're here. We've got questions, I'll answer them. Danny MX says, what diff are you running and what reinforcements have you done? I've got a factory NB 1.8 diff with a Cusco center 1.5 way, I think. It's a clutch pack center, so it's a little bit stiffer and grippier than just a factory Torsen. I have no reinforcements. I'd like to weld up the arms on it at some point with some alloy plate. But it does have Delrin bushes, so that does help with sort of stiffness. He also asks, what hubs am I running and have you ever had a failure? I run stock rear hubs, really want to replace them with something like the MR2 gear that you can see on the Miata Turbo forums. For the front, I've got Bosenjack hubs that are made in Australia by a dude called Bosenjack, and they're pretty expensive, not very common because of the price that they ask, but they're pretty beefy, so hopefully they'll never fail me, and I just keep an eye on them, make sure that they're not starting to present any play. Lan Evo 55, what engine from another vehicle would you swap into your NB and why? I really like the idea of a K-swap or a Honda engine if it wasn't turbocharged, because it fits in a lot of sub 2 litre classes in motorsport here in Australia. For all out bang for buck dollars for power, an LS is kind of hard to look past. Not really a big fan of rotary swaps, but to be honest, the engine that's in there now with the power it's making, I can't see why I wouldn't keep what's there. Jesse the Legend, I'm just about to buy my first car, found a 94 MX-5 for $1,800 US in decent condition. I want to know if the NA is the right car for simple mods. Yeah, 100% NAs or NBs. There are a lot of the parts that can swap between the two. They're both awesome mod cars. They're both pretty cost effective, as you can see. $1,800 for an MX-5 is pretty good value. You wouldn't get one that cheap over here in Australia for not in good condition anyway. You mentioned this one's in decent nick. That's good value. It's hard to beat, honestly. If you had 15 grand Aussie dollars to make a fast road / track car, but also reliable, Which MX-5 would you choose and what mods would you make? With the way prices are going, the NC is hard to beat for like a street slash track hybrid. They've got enough creature comforts, a bit more power, a bit more modern, but you can still buy lots of off-the-shelf bits that make them quick, coilovers, maybe an exhaust. You can tune the ECUs. So a few things there. You buy the car, maybe you could get one for low teens here in Australia. Spend 3 or 4 or 5 grand on some bits. That'd be a nice little car. Tony Barata, I have a 1990 1.6 with Kraftwerk supercharger and Racing Beat headers. There's a lot of heat in the engine bay. Yep, that's what they do. Do you suggest wrapping the headers, buying one of the heat blankets I found on Miata website? Probably much of a muchness. I do think that heat management is important. I do think that like the heat shield I've got on my turbo car works. It genuinely feels like it's retaining heat, keeping it out of the engine bay. And whether you go with the wrap route or one of the blanket routes, I don't know. I can't tell you which one's the right option. Try them both. Try one and see how it goes. If it doesn't improve things, try the other. I suspect the blanket probably will do a better job. Peter Benning. Hello, Peter. Yes, I'd like to know more about the aero on the MX-5. Can you show how to make a good and working front splitter? I've got lots of videos on pretty much everything I've done on that car. Pretty detailed info on how the wing was done. I've got a video explaining the floor. I haven't got a video detailing how I did the front splitter, but fundamentally it's just a sheet of plywood that I cut into a kind of a nice shape. I didn't do anything special. Get out there and just give it a go. Go buy yourself some maybe 9 or 12 mil plywood, a jigsaw or a circular saw or something, and just start making some cuts, get some measurements, mounting it. There are a million ways to do it. There's forums and things that will detail how people have done it in the past. So I'm not doing anything new here, but I will at some point in the near future give you a bit of a video rundown on how I made my splitter. So keep an eye out for that. Frossato says, starting from scratch, what sequence would you modify your track car? Brakes, tyres, suspension, gearbox? Yeah, pretty much exactly in that order. Brakes, then tyres, then suspension, and then gearbox. I mean, even still now, I'd probably do some engine mods before I do the gearbox. But fundamentally, start with brakes. Whatever tyres you're running, brakes, you know, a good set of pads make your life a lot nicer and a lot more pleasurable at the track. Mazda Matrix, best clutch setup for 200 to 300 street horsepower and track driving. Well, that's a big wide range of power and use. Street driving, you want a bit more comfort. Track driving, you want outright performance and grip. 200 horsepower to 300 horsepower, that's a pretty big range. Let's be honest, I'll go err on the side of caution here. The clutch I've got in my track car perfectly fits that build. It's actually not that hard to drive, and it handles the 300 plus horsepower that it's got pumping through it at the moment. An Exidy brass button clutch, it's still sprung, so it's got a bit of give, nice for the street. The brass buttons, lots of grip, it works well. Avon done, best simple aero for stock power dual duty NA. Maybe a little lip on the boot, maybe a nice little splitter on the front, nothing too aggressive, maybe an inch or two protruding from the front bumper with a bit of a lip to kind of bridge the gap between your bumper and the splitter. Just subtle though, probably wouldn't go with a wing or anything too aggressive at the front because you don't have the power to put up with it. Aga Guerrera, how do you feel when driving MX-5? What do you enjoy about it? They're very raw. You can feel everything that goes on when you're driving them. You really feel attached to the car. That saying that the Japanese use when designing this thing, the Jinba Itai, it genuinely is true in a lot of ways. You drive these things and you really can feel attached to them, particularly if you sharpen them up a little bit from factory. They need to make them a road car. When you start to make them a bit more of a toy, it's like you're attached to them. It's such a pleasurable experience. I test drove a used one once, but the experience was overshadowed by a slew of issues, including batteries that died, so I never really got to pay attention to how it felt to drive. That's unfortunate. Find another one to drive. Jonas Lowe, how do he trunk hinges work? OEM? On my NB track car, there are no trunk hinges. I just have a couple of pins that slot into some holes and a single latch at the back. I'll put a clip here now of how that works. So fundamentally, with a push button latch here, push, and the whole boot slides backwards. And then we have a pin that goes into that hole there. And that keeps the whole thing together. Other than that, it literally just lifts out. So there's no hinges at all. Blake's gaming PC. What do you game, Blake? Hope it's not Fortnite. If you were to build an MX-5 track car with an engine swap, which engine would you choose and why? Other than another Miata engine. I mentioned earlier, probably either a K swap or an LS swap. I both like the idea of both of those. If you're going something real crazy, something exotic like a Lambo Hurricane engine or something, like a V10, wouldn't even fit though, would it? Trevin Wheels, do you think the NA can achieve similar levels of body rigidity to the NB after the available underbody bracing? I read parts of the NB shell around the firewall, A-pillar are more rigid. It's true, if you strip the interior out of an NA and an NB, you'll find as the years went on, there was more and more extra bracing and things that went into the chassis and the body. Under my elbow here, like where the center console is, there's a heap of extra bracing. And of course, there's also the bolt-on bracing underneath the NBs. And that grew and got bigger and more prevalent as the years went on. I don't think it makes a huge difference to the way the car drives. Some people will argue it does. Maybe that's because I just aren't as in tune with my cars as some other people might be, but yeah, that's just me. Personally, I don't think it makes a big difference. If you're really worried about it, a roll bar doesn't hurt. If you're really, really worried about it, a welded roll cage will definitely alleviate any differences. Gary Fintelman, I'd like to see an MX-5 Mythbusters video. What myths do we have about MX-5s? If you have any, post them below and maybe I can make Gary's dream come true. Devon Starbuck, that's a cool name. Did you look at other engine options? Fundamentally, no, never really considered it. The costs of changing engine, having to custom mount them, custom fit them to a gearbox that either you're going to have to try and mate it to the Mazda gearbox, or you're going to have to use the gearbox that comes with the engine and then try and fit that into the car. Plus there's all the wiring, plus there's all the making all the other bits work like plumbing and things. A video explaining the build problems, reliability, largest bang for buck would be great. What would you do differently if you ever did it again? Lessons learned. And there's lots of things in there that I can't answer in one simple comment. Fundamentally, I redid things like injectors, turbo, exhaust, heaps of stuff I did multiple times until I got it right, so it's trial and error. I guess do your research, look at what others have done that are doing similar builds to you. Not every build is the same, it demands the same sort of requirements. Because I'm doing a track car build, generally it works a lot harder, therefore I need to do things a little bit differently to if it's a street build where you're not sitting at full throttle for 90% of the time. A street car usually doesn't get driven the way a track car does. Generally you can get away with being a little more aggressive in what you demand of the parts because they're not working as hard. Mechanical Yoda. Is that like Mechanical Stig, but the Star Wars version? Why you hate the NC? I do not. Aeronoid123. Thoughts on Rotary and K20 swap? I think I've already touched on that. K20, yes. Rotary, eh. John. Hello, John. In terms of making the best street Miata, more power or better suspension? Both? Start with the suspension though. Jeffrey Lyons. Would be curious to see your timing map. Having a real time with mine. Sorry to hear you're having trouble with your timing map, mate. That's unfortunate. I will share mine. I'll have a link in the description below for you. It's nothing special, and to be honest, it's not as aggressive as I think it can be. As far as I understand, MX-5s can handle a bit more, a pretty aggressive timing map, but I'll share mine. It's not perfect though. JW Longy. turbo, supercharger, or ITB? ITBs are cool for noise, and that's about it, unless you want to spend a lot of money on building everything else in the engine in terms of headwork and things. Turbo and supercharger, it's much of a muchness in a lot of ways. Turbo probably for outright performance and the convenience of just turning up the boost whenever you want. Supercharger is great fun for the street. I really like the sort of linearity, and that whine is really it is really cool. Randy G7, any plans to swap out the doors, trunk, bonnet to carbon fibre units from carbon Miata? Well, my doors are factory steel, although they've been heavily gutted. The trunk and the bonnet in my NB are already carbon that was made here in Australia by Lightyear Carbon Fibre. I wouldn't use carbon Miata parts, to be honest. I've had bad experiences with them in the past, so I have no interest in buying from them again. If I was going to change the doors, I'd just go visit Lightyear. I'm pretty sure he's still got NB door molds, and he could make some. They'd be better quality, and they'd actually be quite light. Hans, where you got the hardtop from? How did you build it? It was from Lightyear Carbon Fibre here in Australia, not very far away from where I live. He built it himself using, well, on my car, in fact. We kind of he molded it off his NA, and then a long time later, with a lot of hard work, ended up with a bunch of different molds. Look up Lightyear Carbon Fibre. There's a few other people that make fastback type roofs. Yeah. Blake's back. Hey Blake, you're back for another question. Looking back at all the Miatas you've worked on or built, are there any upgrades that you don't recommend or you won't do in the future? I guess there's some things you might question yourself on doing. In this car, I don't really like the tyres that it runs. They're crap, to be honest. They're just a generic, no-name brand. The supercharger in this is okay, but I'm not sure if it was worth the time and the money and the trouble, because I rather enjoyed the simple, reliable setup that it was before. It was really revvy, and it had like a 4/4 rear diff, so it made it quite fun to smash through the gears, but it was completely stock. Other than that, I'd suggest get out there and give it a go. Look at what other people have done, and enjoy what you're doing. Do what you want to do. No one can tell you how to build your car. Oil Larson Wright, talk us how you engineer your car throughout a weekend. Tyre pressures, anti-roll bar, aero. It's not as complex as you might think, to be honest. Fundamentally, I've got the car to a point where I really like how it drives, mostly. I did the alignment myself in my driveway, and at this point, a lot of my time is spent on the weekends is just driving the car, learning the track, and reminding myself how to drive, because I don't do it often enough. I do play with tyre pressures. That's probably the first thing I do. I'll keep an eye on those. Generally, with my semi-slick AO50 Yokohama, I get around about 30 psi as my ideal temp pressure, but that depends on the car and track setup. Anti-roll bar I almost never change. Aero I almost never change, because I don't drive it enough, to be honest. If I was driving it more, like every weekend, you'd get the opportunity to try these different things, learn what works and what doesn't. I'm not a pro at this, one-man band kind of thing, so when you're at the track, you're so busy, you don't get a lot of opportunity to play with this stuff. It's a shame. Brap. Why do you have the turbo seeing hot coolant that comes out of the head? Presumably you're talking about my turbo NB. I don't. So the cold side of the coolant that's fed into the turbo comes straight after the electric water pump, and it's a T that comes off the OEM water pump inlet. So keep in mind, the water pump on my car is electronic, therefore it's a little bit different to a normal setup. And then the coolant route out of the turbo goes straight to the hot side of the radiator, so it doesn't. Yeah. John Player, is there a Butthead Motorsport? Irvin Nagy says, awesome. How do you interface your Raspberry Pi with your car? Do you use ODB2? I get that question a lot, and I thought I covered it in the video, but I get the question a lot nonetheless. Fundamentally, it's a USB connection straight from the Raspberry Pi straight to the MS3 Mega Squirt ECU. It's an aftermarket ECU. There is no OBD port on that car, and it's a proprietary kind of interface. It's not necessarily out of the box, off the shelf kind of thing. Drake Jones says 2100 for the Leica. Hey, awesome, thanks mate. Joe May says, what ECU and gauges are you currently running on your car? I'm working on getting some parts ready for my turbo build. ECU is a Mega Squirt MS3 DIY. Auto-Tune sold it. It's a plug-and-play unit straight from them. Nowadays there are a lot of options that are all similarly priced. Back when I bought that ECU, there weren't really as many available solutions. The ME221 from the UK is starting to look pretty impressive. There's also some Aussie-made products like the Heltec. They're usually a bit more expensive. Stuff like Motec as well, getting a bit pricier. I think the Mega Squirt's got a good community following. In terms of gauges, I pulled a lot of them out. If you saw my recent dashboard update, you will have seen that I've only kept the AFR gauge. But fundamentally, everything is in my Raspberry Pi dash now, so I pulled all the other gauges out. Fidel, does the Miata NC timing belts require replacing? I'm pretty sure a timing chain, and therefore maintenance free. But I'm not a mechanic, so please. Please talk to your mechanic. Casey says bushings, control arms, perhaps. Bushings in my NB are energy suspension poly bushes. I hate them, but they were kind of the best you could get back in the day. They're starting to get really worn, and I'm looking to do something like a Delrin option now. Control arms, I run all stock stuff. I get the adjustability I need out of them, and they're not really known to fail. Particularly here in Australia, we don't have a lot of rust or anything, so it's not like they get weak from damage from rust. There are people that run bigger ones or that run adjustable aftermarket options, but I get the suspension adjustment that I need from the standard can bolts, so yeah, stock arms. Avner Cohen says, how you solved the 6-speed gearbox weird shifting? Now it seemed good. Yeah, if you saw my last couple of on-track videos, shifting was much better. I just changed my trans oil to a Fuchs brand oil. I was running the Penrite stuff before. I think the Penrite wasn't quite right for that box. And I guess that's kind of the message there, is if things aren't working for you, try a different oil. Sometimes it's as simple as that. The Miata gearboxes have been known to be a little cheeky when it comes to oil. Disease Azul says, are the left foot dabs on the brake to keep heat into the brakes? No. So you would have seen in my recent couple of videos at Winton or at Wakefield, I was doing a bit of left foot dabbing while driving down the straight, and that's to alleviate pad knockback. So when you have a lot of grip and big brakes and you hook through a corner, the axial sort of load, the rotation of the car and the way that the wheel is pulling due to grip can twist the rotor enough in relation to the caliper that it pushes the pads back away from the rotor, resulting in when you push your foot down on the brake, there's kind of a sponginess and a gap between pressing the brake and actually getting braking force. And the dab on the brakes is to alleviate that. It pushes the pads back out, pushes the pistons back out, so that they're touching but not pushing any force on the rotor, so that when you do go to brake in your braking zone, it's all nice and hot and ready to go, and there's no gap between pushing the brake and actually braking. Jorist says, get a better car. Okay. As the Matrix says, driving on the street? Why, yes I am. Thanks for asking. Dylan Sorensen, do you have a rough weight on your NB? I imagine it's somewhere around 2100. I'm assuming that's pounds. Don't forget your units, kids. The car weighs about 930 kilograms, which is about a smidge over 2,000 pounds, I think. I don't know, we don't use pounds over here in Australia. Well, this is a big one. All right. Around the World 47 wants to know, Brendan, this is awesome. Thanks for putting together sweet time lapse of your radiator build. One of these days, in your infinite free time, would you talk us through why you went through what you did, why you are drilling, tapping holes in the radiator, what happened to the casing around the old radiator, and what was it for? What about why only one fan on your new radiator? Okay, so in my recent radiator build, or install, I put a Super Miata crossflow radiator in, and I pulled the old generic eBay one out. The old eBay one had a aluminium cowling duct that effectively influenced airflow, encouraged it to go through the radiator and out the bonnet vents. I scrapped all of that, put the crossflow radiator in, and didn't redo the ductwork. I didn't redo the ductwork because it was a lot of work and it was always a pain in the ass, and to be honest, I'm not sure if it was all that effective. Also, the new radiator should be quite good at cooling anyway, and the vents already in the hood should be quite effective even without that ducting, although perhaps not as effective. I only run one fan purely because when you're at the track, generally you don't need a fan. You're moving, your car has airflow running through it, so the fan actually doesn't do a whole lot. Fans are only really critical in stationary or bumper-to-bumper low-speed traffic where you don't get the airflow from naturally moving. So one radiator just to keep things under control in the pits. If it does get a bit warm, once I'm out on track, the fan doesn't really have any effect. Anthony Spiro, do you think the stock exhaust is good or should you get a performance one? Look, that totally depends on what you want to get out of your car, whether you want extra noise, whether you want extra performance. The performance gains are pretty minuscule on an MX-5 when it comes to exhaust, and the price can get pretty high. If you find a cheapie around your area, it's totally worth it, I suppose, but it's generally up to you. The performance gains are pretty minimal though. Ara wants to know, hi, what is the name of the company that makes the sway bar kit on your track car? HM Speed Shop, Matty in Hawaii. Once again, I'll say a massive thanks to him. Go check it out, HM Speed Shop. I'll put a link down below as well. Kenny Rutch wants to know, high ducktail spoiler or low or none? It's only up to you, dude. Don't ask me what you want to do with your car. Personally, a little spoiler, I don't mind. A big one, I do not. Anything vertical on the back of the trunk, nah, it's just not my style. But hey, it's a style thing, totally up to you. And last but not least, Powerhouse says, LS swap it. Wait, that's not a question, one sec. Rotary swap it? Well, Powerhouse, I think I kind of touched on this earlier. LS for me, we get them plentifully here in Australia, thankfully, to the old Commodore days. And a Rotary, look, we tried one in the RX-8, and they're cool, but yeah, just doesn't ring bells for me. That was nearly 50 questions, I reckon. Wow. Thank you so much to all of you that submitted questions, and thanks to some of you that didn't submit them and I just kind of took your comments and turned them into questions anyway. Oh no, one of our cameras has died. Hang on, impromptu camera work. Well, what can I say? As always, I really appreciate you coming along. It's been great to have you all along here enjoying this. I hope you enjoyed the little drive and the Q&A work. If you've got any other questions about cars, about MX-5s, about my channel, about my cars, please leave them below. I'd love to hear from you. Perhaps we can do another one of these again in the future. It's been great to have you here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Ta.